Have you ever felt your world collapse when you lost someone or something precious to you? Have you ever clutched desperately to what was slipping away, unable to accept that it could really be gone? Have you carried your grief like a burden so heavy that you wondered if you could survive another day? Have you looked around at others living their normal lives and felt utterly alone in your suffering, as if no one could possibly understand the depth of your pain? Loss is perhaps the most universal human experience, and yet, when it strikes us personally, it feels unbearably singular. We believe our pain is unique, our suffering incomparable. We search desperately for ways to undo what has happened, to turn back time, to wake from what must surely be a nightmare. And in those dark moments when we realize that what is lost cannot be recovered, we face one of life's most profound challenges. How do we accept the unacceptable? The Buddha, over 2,500 years ago, offered teachings that speak directly to this struggle. His wisdom on loss, grief, and acceptance has guided countless individuals through their darkest hours. Tonight, we will explore these teachings through one of the most powerful stories in Buddhist tradition, a story that begins with unbearable grief and ends with profound liberation. Before we begin this journey together, I invite you to like the video and subscribe to give me more motivation to continue bringing you these stories of wisdom and peace. Our story takes us back to ancient India, to the time when the Buddha walked the earth, teaching the path to freedom from suffering. In the prosperous city of Shravasti, there lived a young woman whose story would become one of the most enduring parables in Buddhist literature. Her name was Kisa Gotami, though the villagers called her Skinny Gotami because she had been born into such poverty that proper nourishment had always been scarce. Kisa Gotami's early life was marked by hardship. She knew hunger intimately, understood what it meant to be looked down upon by others, to be considered of little value in society's eyes. She was thin and frail, her body a testament to the deprivations of her childhood. The other children in the village would sometimes tease her, and even as she grew into a young woman, she carried the stigma of her poverty like an invisible weight. Despite these difficulties, or perhaps because of them, Kisa Gotami possessed a gentle spirit and a capacity for love that would define her destiny. When she was still very young, barely more than a girl herself, she was married into a family of somewhat higher status than her own. This marriage, as was customary in those times, was arranged. She entered her new home with hope, but also with the quiet understanding that she would need to prove her worth to earn the acceptance and respect of her husband's family. At first, life in her new household was challenging. Her mother-in-law looked at her with barely concealed disappointment, seeing only the skinny girl from a poor family. Her husband was not unkind, but neither was he particularly warm. The servants whispered about her behind her back. Kisa Gotami felt the weight of their judgment, felt herself constantly on the periphery of this family she had been expected to join. But then something happened that changed everything. Kisa Gotami became pregnant, and in the fullness of time, she gave birth to a son. The moment she held that tiny, precious life in her arms, she felt a transformation occur within her. This was her child, her beloved son, a being who looked at her with unconditional trust and love. More than that, the birth of her son changed how others viewed her. Suddenly, she had fulfilled her most important duty. Her mother-in-law smiled at her warmly. Her husband regarded her with new respect and affection. The servants no longer whispered with disdain. Kisa Gotami poured all of her love, all of her devotion into this child. Every moment spent caring for him felt like a blessing. When he smiled, her heart would overflow with joy. When he cried, she would soothe him with all the tenderness in the world. As he grew from an infant into a toddler, learning to sit, then crawl, then finally to walk on his own 2 feet, she watched with a mother's pride and wonder. This child was everything to her validation, her purpose, her happiness, her entire world. She would watch him play in the courtyard of their home, his laughter ringing out like music. She would hold his small hand as they walked through the marketplace, feeling the warmth of his trust in her. At night, she would lie beside him as he slept, listening to the gentle rhythm of his breathing, thinking that she had never known such contentment, such complete and perfect love. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Her son grew stronger and more curious about the world around him. He had just learned to walk confidently, no longer tottering with uncertain steps, but moving with the bold assurance of a child discovering his independence. Kisa Gautami delighted in every new accomplishment, every new word he learned to speak, every small triumph of his young life. Then came a day that would shatter her world entirely. It was an ordinary morning, unremarkable in every way. The sun rose as it always did, casting its warm light over the city of Shravasti. Kisa Gautami went about her daily tasks, her son playing nearby as she worked. Perhaps she was preparing the morning meal, or drawing water, or tending to some household duty. Her son was exploring the world around him with that fearless curiosity that only young children possess. In a single, terrible moment, everything changed. Her son was running, as children do, when suddenly he stumbled. Perhaps there was a stone in his path, or perhaps his small feet simply betrayed him. He fell hard, striking his head on the ground. At first, Kisa Gautami wasn't overly concerned. Children fall all the time, and usually they get right back up, crying perhaps, but essentially unharmed. But her son didn't get up. He lay completely still. Kisa Gautami rushed to him, her heart already beginning to pound with a fear she didn't yet fully comprehend. She picked him up, calling his name, but there was no response. His small body was limp in her arms. His eyes were closed. She shook him gently, then more urgently, calling his name again and again. "Wake up," she pleaded. "Wake up, my darling. Wake up." But he did not wake up. In that moment, something broke inside Kisa Gautami that would take much more than time to heal. She refused to accept what her eyes were telling her. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. Her son, her precious, beloved son, couldn't possibly be gone. He was just sleeping. He was just unconscious. If she could only find the right remedy, the right medicine, he would wake up. He had to wake up. She cradled his lifeless body against her chest and ran out into the street. The first person she encountered was a neighbor woman who took one look at the scene, and her hand flew to her mouth in horror. But Kisa Gautami, her eyes wild with desperate hope, didn't see the horror in the woman's expression. She only saw a potential source of help. "Please," Kisa Gautami begged, "do you have medicine? My son needs medicine. He won't wake up." The neighbor woman's eyes filled with tears. "Kisa Gautami," she said gently, trying to find words that would penetrate the mother's denial. "Your son he's gone. I'm so sorry. You must make arrangements for—" "No," Kisa Gautami interrupted, already moving away. "You're wrong. He's just sleeping. I just need to find the right medicine." She went from house to house, knocking on every door, still clutching her son's body. At each home, the response was the same. The neighbors would see her coming, and their faces would fill with pity and sorrow. They would try to tell her the truth, She refused to hear. Some would try to comfort her. Others would simply shake their heads sadly and close their doors, unable to bear the sight of such profound grief. But Kisa Gotami would not, could not, accept what they were telling her. In her mind, to accept that her son was dead would be to give up on him, to abandon him, and she could never do that. A mother never gives up on her child. A mother always finds a way. There had to be someone, somewhere, who could help her. As she wandered through the streets of Shravasti, still holding her son's cold body, people began to whisper. Some said she had lost her mind with grief. Others felt such deep compassion for her that they could hardly stand to watch her suffering. Children stared with wide, frightened eyes. Their parents pulled them close, grateful that this tragedy had not befallen their own families. Hour after hour passed. The sun moved across the sky. Kisa Gotami's arms ached from carrying her son, but she barely noticed. Her throat was raw from crying and pleading. Her feet were sore from walking. Still, she continued her desperate search, driven by a hope that was beginning to feel more like madness. Finally, as the afternoon sun began its descent toward evening, Kisa Gotami encountered an elderly man sitting outside a shop. He was a respected elder in the community, known for his wisdom and kindness. When he saw Kisa Gotami approaching, he didn't turn away as so many others had done. Instead, he looked at her with deep compassion, and when she began her familiar plea for medicine, he raised his hand gently to stop her. "Dear child," he said softly, "I cannot give you what you seek, but there is one who might be able to help you." Kisa Gotami's eyes lit up with desperate hope. "Who? Please tell me who." "The Buddha," the old man said. "The enlightened one is teaching not far from here. If anyone can help you, surely it would be him. Go to the Buddha, Kisa Gotami. Perhaps he will have the medicine you need." At the mention of the Buddha, something stirred in Kisa Gotami's consciousness. She had heard of this great teacher, of course. Everyone in Shravasti had heard of the Buddha. He was famous throughout the region as a man of extraordinary wisdom and compassion, one who had found the answers to life's deepest questions and dedicated himself to sharing those answers with all who would listen. Kisa Gotami had once caught a glimpse of the Buddha as he walked through the city on his arms round, surrounded by his orange-robed disciples. Even from a distance, she had been struck by the peace that seemed to emanate from him, by the dignity and grace of his bearing. She had thought then that she would like to hear his teachings someday, but in the busyness of her life as a mother and wife, she had never found the time. Now, clutching her dead son, she felt a surge of desperate hope. If anyone could bring her son back to life, surely it would be this holy man, this teacher who seemed to possess powers beyond those of ordinary people. Without wasting another moment, she set off in the direction the old man had indicated, her precious burden still held tight in her trembling arms. She found the Buddha in a grove of trees outside the city, a place where he often taught those who came to learn from him. A group of disciples sat in a circle around him, listening as he spoke about the nature of suffering and the path to liberation. When Kisa Gotami appeared at the edge of the grove, several of the disciples looked up, their expressions shifting to concern as they saw the wild-eyed woman holding a small, still form. But the Buddha's expression did not change. His eyes, filled with infinite compassion, took in the entire scene in an instant. He understood immediately what had happened, understood the depths of this mother's grief and the denial that gripped her heart like a vice. He gestured for her to approach. Kisa Gotami stumbled forward and fell at the Buddha's feet. "Lord Buddha," she cried, her voice breaking, Please, I beg you, give me the medicine that will cure my son. Everyone says you are the wisest and most compassionate of all beings. Please, please help me." The Buddha looked at her with such kindness that for a moment, something in Kisa Gotami's chest loosened slightly. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle and calm. "Kisa Gotami, I can help you, but to prepare the medicine you need, I require a specific ingredient." "Anything," Kisa Gotami said immediately. "I will get you anything you need." "I need a handful of mustard seeds," the Buddha said. Kisa Gotami's face brightened. Mustard seeds were one of the most common spices in India, used in nearly every household for cooking. Surely every home in Shravasti would have some. This would be easy. She started to stand up, ready to rush back to the city immediately. But the Buddha raised his hand. "Wait," he said. "There is one more requirement. The mustard seeds must come from a household where no one has ever died." Kisa Gotami barely heard this second part. Her mind had already latched onto the possibility of hope, the promise of a cure. "Yes, yes, of course," she said quickly. "I will find such seeds and bring them back to you immediately." She hurried back to the city, her heart lighter than it had been since the terrible moment of her son's fall. The Buddha would save her child. She just needed to get the mustard seeds. It seemed so simple. Surely, in a city as large as Shravasti, she would easily find a house that met the Buddha's requirements. She went to the first house she came to, a prosperous-looking home with a well-maintained courtyard. A woman answered her knock, and her expression became concerned when she saw Kisa Gotami's state. "Please," Kisa Gotami said, trying to compose herself. "Could you spare a handful of mustard seeds? The Buddha needs them to make medicine for my son." The woman nodded sympathetically. "Of course. Wait just a moment." She disappeared into her house and returned with a small cloth bag of mustard seeds, which she pressed into Kisa Gotami's hand. Kisa Gotami felt a surge of joy and relief. She had the seeds, but then she remembered the Buddha's second instruction. "May I ask," she said, her voice tentative, "has anyone in your household ever died?" The woman's face fell. "Oh," she said softly. "Yes, I'm afraid so. My father passed away just last month, and my grandmother died 3 years ago, and my youngest daughter," her voice caught, "my youngest daughter died when she was only 6 years old." Kisa Gotami's hope faltered. She handed the mustard seeds back to the woman. "I'm sorry," she said. "The Buddha specified that the seeds must come from a house where no one has ever died." She moved on to the next house. Again, the occupants willingly gave her mustard seeds. Again, she asked the question. "Yes," they replied. "My husband died last year." The seeds were returned. At the third house, "My mother died just last week." At the fourth house, "We lost our son to illness 2 years ago." At the fifth house, "My wife died in childbirth." At the sixth house, "My brother died when he was young." House after house, street after street, Kisa Gotami went through the entire city. At every single home, the answer was the same. Yes, someone had died there. A parent, a child, a spouse, a sibling, a grandparent. Death had touched every household without exception. As the day wore on and the sun began to set, something slowly began to shift in Kisa Gotami's consciousness. At first, she was merely frustrated that she couldn't find a household that met the Buddha's requirement. But as she heard story after story of loss, as she saw the grief in people's eyes when they spoke of their loved ones who had died, a realization began to dawn. Death was everywhere. Loss was universal. Every family had experienced it. Every heart had been broken by it. She was not alone in her suffering. She was not the only one who had lost someone precious. In every home she had visited, behind every door she had knocked on, there were people who understood her pain because they had experienced their own. As darkness fell over the city, Kisa Gautami finally stopped walking. She looked down at her son's body, still cradled in her arms. And for the first time since that terrible morning, she truly saw what she had been refusing to see. Her son was gone. He had died. No medicine could bring him back. No amount of denial could change this truth. The grief that crashed over her then was like a wave, pulling her under with its force. She sank to her knees in the street and wept as she had not allowed herself to weep before. She wept for her son, for all the moments they would never share, for all the days of his life that would never be lived. She wept for herself, for the mother who had lost her child, and she wept for all the families she had visited that day, for all the people in all the world who had known this same shattering loss. But even as she wept, something else was happening. In the midst of her grief, there was a strange sense of relief. She was no longer alone with her pain. She was part of something larger, the great community of human beings who had loved and lost, who had suffered and survived. Her grief was not singular or strange. It was, in fact, the most human of experiences. When her tears finally subsided, Kisa Gautami knew what she needed to do. With great tenderness, she carried her son's body to the charnel grounds outside the city, the place where the dead were cremated according to custom. She arranged for the funeral rites to be performed. She watched as the flames consumed her son's physical form, understanding now that his body was just that, a temporary form that had arisen, existed for a brief time, and now had ceased to be. The next morning, as the sun rose over Shravasti, Kisa Gautami returned to the grove where the Buddha taught. She approached him and prostrated herself before him in gratitude and respect. The Buddha looked at her with his compassionate eyes. "Did you bring the mustard seeds?" he asked gently. Kisa Gautami shook her head. "No, Lord. I could not find a single house where death had never entered." The Buddha nodded. "Tell me, Kisa Gautami, what did you learn in your search?" Kisa Gautami was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite the tears that ran down her cheeks. "I learned that I am not alone in my grief. I learned that death comes to every household, that loss is the experience of all living beings. I learned that in thinking my suffering was unique, I was actually adding to my pain. I learned that my son's death, though it breaks my heart, is part of the natural order of things, that all things which arise must also pass away." She paused, then continued. "I learned that the living are few, but the dead are many. I learned that in my desperate attempt to deny death, I was actually refusing to honor my son's life. And I learned that there is a difference between grief and suffering, between the natural sadness of loss and the additional anguish of resistance." The Buddha smiled, and in that smile, Kisa Gautami felt a warmth that seemed to ease some of the ache in her heart. "You have learned well, Kisa Gautami. The medicine I promised was not for your son, but for you. The cure is not in bringing back what is lost, but in accepting what is. Tell me, do you wish to learn more?" "Yes, Lord," Kisa Gautami said without hesitation. "I wish to understand the path that leads beyond sorrow." And so Kisa Gautami became a student of the Buddha. She joined the community of nuns, dedicating herself to the practice of meditation and the study of the Dharma. Through diligent practice and deep contemplation, she gradually came to understand the profound truths that the Buddha taught. The truths of impermanence, of non-self, of the causes of suffering and the path to liberation. Over time, Kisa Gotami became known among the Buddha's disciples as one of the most dedicated and accomplished practitioners. The Buddha himself praised her, naming her foremost in ascetic practices among the nuns. She had transformed her grief into wisdom, her suffering into compassion for all beings who suffer. Years later, Kisa Gotami composed verses that would be preserved in the Therigatha, the collection of poems by early Buddhist nuns. In these verses, she spoke of impermanence and the peace that comes from truly understanding it. She spoke of how the darkness of ignorance had been shattered, how she had found freedom from the endless cycle of birth and death. Her words carried the authority of someone who had faced the worst that life could offer and had found a way through to the other side. But let us pause here in our story to reflect more deeply on the teachings that emerge from Kisa Gotami's experience. What was the Buddha actually teaching her when he sent her on that journey through the city? What profound truths about loss, grief, and acceptance are embedded in this ancient tale? First and foremost, the Buddha was teaching about the universality of loss. In modern times, we often live in a kind of bubble, insulated from death and suffering. We push these realities to the margins of our consciousness. We live as if we and our loved ones will exist forever. When death intrudes, we are shocked, unprepared, unable to process what has happened. But death is not an aberration. It is not a mistake or an injustice, though it certainly feels that way when it touches us personally. Death is woven into the very fabric of existence. The Buddha taught that everything that arises must also pass away. This is not a pessimistic or depressing teaching, though it might seem so at first. Rather, it is a realistic teaching, one that encourages us to see life as it actually is, rather than as we wish it would be. When the Buddha sent Kisa Gotami to search for a household untouched by death, he knew, of course, that no such household existed. But he also knew that Kisa Gotami needed to discover this truth for herself. If he had simply told her, "Death is universal," she might have accepted it intellectually, while her heart remained locked in denial. By having her go from house to house, hearing story after story of loss, she came to understand, on a much deeper level, that her experience was not unique. This understanding is crucial for several reasons. First, it helps us realize that we are not alone in our suffering. When grief strikes, we often feel isolated, as if we are the only ones who have ever experienced such pain. But the truth is that every human being will face loss in their lifetime. Every person you pass on the street has either already experienced significant loss or will do so in the future. We are all in this together, all part of the great community of beings who love and lose. Second, understanding the universality of loss helps us develop compassion both for ourselves and for others. When we see that our suffering is part of the human condition, rather than a personal failing or a cosmic injustice aimed specifically at us, we can be gentler with ourselves. We can allow ourselves to grieve without adding the extra burden of feeling that we should be handling things better. And when we truly understand that everyone suffers, we naturally feel more compassion for others, more patience with their struggles, more kindness toward their pain. The Buddha's teaching on impermanence, anicca in Pali, is central to understanding loss and developing acceptance. Impermanence means that nothing stays the same. Everything that exists is constantly changing. Our bodies change from moment to moment. Our thoughts and feelings arise and pass away. Our circumstances shift and transform. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is eternal. In the Buddhist understanding, there are three characteristics that mark all of existence. The first is impermanence, anicca. The second is suffering, or unsatisfactoriness, dukkha. The third is non-self, anatta. These three characteristics are intimately interconnected. Impermanence is the most fundamental of these characteristics. It applies to absolutely everything in the conditioned world. Your body is impermanent. Right now, as you listen to these words, cells in your body are dying and being replaced. Your skin is constantly shedding and renewing. Your bones are being broken down and rebuilt. The person you were 10 years ago, even the person you were this morning, is not exactly the same person you are now. Your thoughts and emotions are impermanent. Notice how your mind works. A thought arises, exists for a moment, and then disappears, replaced by another thought. An emotion wells up, reaches a peak, and then gradually subsides. Even the strongest feelings don't last forever. Joy fades into contentment or neutrality. Anger burns itself out. Even grief, though it may return in waves over many years, is not a constant state. Your relationships are impermanent. People come into your life, stay for a while, perhaps for many years, and then leave, whether through death, distance, or simply drifting apart. Even relationships that last a lifetime are constantly changing as both people grow and evolve. Your possessions are impermanent. Houses crumble, cars rust, clothes wear out, technology becomes obsolete. Nothing you own will last forever. Even the earth itself is impermanent. Mountains erode over millennia. Rivers change their courses. Continents drift. Species evolve or go extinct. On a cosmic scale, even stars are born, burn brightly for billions of years, and eventually die. The Buddha taught that this impermanence is not something to be feared or resisted. It is simply the nature of reality. Fighting against impermanence is like fighting against the waves of the ocean or the changing of the seasons. It is futile and exhausting. Yet this is exactly what we do when we experience loss. We fight against what has happened. We say, "This shouldn't have happened. This isn't fair. I can't accept this." We bargain with reality, searching for ways to undo what has occurred, or at least to make sense of it in a way that doesn't hurt so much. We rage against the impermanence of life, against the fact that the people we love don't stay forever. This resistance to what is this refusal to accept impermanence is the source of much of our suffering. The loss itself causes pain, yes. Grief is a natural response to loss. But we add layers of suffering on top of that natural pain when we resist, when we cannot accept, when we tell ourselves stories about how things should be different. The Buddha made a crucial distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable. If you stub your toe, it hurts. If someone you love dies, you feel grief. This pain is part of being alive, part of having a body and emotions and connections to others. But suffering, the extra layer of anguish, despair, and torment we pile on top of pain, is optional. It arises from our resistance to what is, from our craving for things to be different than they are. This is where acceptance comes in. Acceptance does not mean liking what has happened or being happy about it. It does not mean giving up or becoming passive. Acceptance simply means acknowledging reality as it is. It means saying, "This has happened. This is real. I cannot change it." From that place of acceptance, we can then decide how to respond, how to move forward, how to integrate our loss into our lives in a meaningful way. In Kisa Gautami's story, we see the journey from denial to acceptance. At first, she absolutely refused to accept that her son had died. She carried his body around, insisting he was just sleeping, just in need of medicine. This denial was a form of resistance to impermanence. She wanted reality to be different than it was. She wanted her son to be permanent, to be an exception to the rule that all things must pass. The Buddha's compassionate skillfulness was in not forcing her to accept what she wasn't ready to accept. He didn't lecture her about impermanence or tell her to get over it. Instead, he gave her a task that would lead her, gently but inexorably, to the truth. Through her own experience, through seeing loss reflected in every household she visited, she came to understand that death is not an exception but the rule. Impermanence is not a personal tragedy but a universal truth. When Kisa Gotami finally accepted her son's death, it didn't mean she stopped feeling sad. Grief is a natural human emotion, a reflection of love. To love someone is to become vulnerable to loss. If we never loved, we would never grieve. But that would be a terrible bargain to protect ourselves from grief by closing our hearts to love. The Buddhist approach to grief is not about becoming emotionless or detached. It's about feeling your feelings fully while also understanding their impermanent nature. Grief comes in waves. Sometimes it crashes over you with overwhelming force. Sometimes it recedes and you feel almost normal. Neither state is permanent. The wave that knocks you down will pass. The calm period will eventually give way to another wave. Understanding this helps you ride out the difficult moments without becoming convinced that the pain will last forever. The Buddha also taught about the concept of attachment and how it relates to suffering and loss. Attachment, in Buddhist terms, doesn't mean love or care or connection. It means clinging, grasping, trying to hold on to something as if it were permanent when it is actually impermanent. We become attached to people, to our ideas about how life should be, to our roles and identities, to our possessions and experiences. We want things to stay the same. We want the good times to last forever. We want the people we love to never change, never leave, never die. This wanting, this clinging to permanence in an impermanent world sets us up for suffering. Think about how we relate to pleasant experiences. You have a wonderful day, and you want it to continue forever, but it can't. The day ends, the experience fades, and if you cling to it, trying to recreate it or lamenting its passing, you suffer. Or think about how we relate to our youth. We want to stay young and healthy forever, but aging is inevitable. Our bodies change, weaken, eventually break down. If we cling to an image of ourselves as young and unchanging, we will suffer as age transforms us. The same is true with people. We love someone and want them to be in our lives forever, but people change, relationships evolve, and eventually, everyone we know will die, or we will die ourselves. If we cling to the illusion that our loved ones are permanent fixtures in our lives, we set ourselves up for tremendous suffering when loss inevitably occurs. Now, you might be thinking, but should I just not care about people? Should I not form deep connections to avoid the pain of loss? This is a common misunderstanding of Buddhist teachings. The Buddha never taught that we should become cold or uncaring. He taught the opposite, that we should cultivate deep compassion and loving kindness for all beings. The difference lies in the quality of our love. We can love deeply without attachment. We can cherish people fully while also understanding that our time with them is limited. We can hold our relationships lightly, with open hands rather than clenched fists. This doesn't diminish the love. In fact, it often enhances it. Because when we truly understand impermanence, we appreciate each moment we have with our loved ones more fully. We don't take them for granted. We treasure the time we have together because we know it won't last forever. There's a beautiful teaching in Buddhism about holding things like water in cupped hands. If you clench your fist around water, trying to grasp it tightly, it squeezes out between your fingers and you lose it. But if you hold your hands gently cupped, the water can rest in your palms. You can appreciate its coolness, its clarity, its fluidity, and when the time comes for the water to flow away, you can let it go without struggle. This is how we can hold our relationships, our experiences, our very lives, with gentle, open hands, present with them fully while they're here, appreciating them deeply, but also ready to let them go when the time comes, without adding resistance and clinging to the natural pain of parting. Kisa Gotami learned this lesson through her devastating loss. The Buddha taught her not to deny her grief or to pretend it didn't matter that her son had died. Instead, he taught her to see her grief within the larger context of impermanence and universal suffering. He taught her that accepting loss doesn't mean not caring. It means understanding the nature of reality so clearly that you can experience grief without being destroyed by it. Let us delve deeper into what acceptance actually looks like in practice. Many people hear the word acceptance and think it means resignation or defeat. They think it means giving up hope or becoming passive in the face of difficulty. But this is not what acceptance means in the Buddhist context. Acceptance is an active stance, not a passive one. It means fully acknowledging what is true in this moment, without trying to escape from it, deny it, or distort it. It means being present with reality as it actually is, not as you wish it would be. When you lose someone you love, acceptance means allowing yourself to feel the full weight of that loss. It means not pushing away your grief, not distracting yourself constantly to avoid the pain, not pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It means sitting with your sadness, your anger, your confusion, your yearning for what was lost. It means letting these emotions move through you like waves, feeling them fully, and trusting that they will eventually subside. Acceptance also means acknowledging what cannot be changed. You cannot bring back someone who has died. You cannot undo a divorce, or a betrayal, or a catastrophic illness. You cannot make yourself younger or turn back time. Certain things are simply beyond your control, no matter how desperately you want them to be different. This might sound depressing, but actually, accepting what you cannot change is incredibly freeing. Think about how much energy you waste fighting against things that are already done, already decided, already in the past. You replay conversations, wishing you had said something different. You torture yourself with what-ifs and if-onlys. You carry resentment and bitterness toward reality itself for not conforming to your wishes. All of this mental and emotional energy is being used to fight a battle you cannot possibly win. The past is past. What has happened has happened. No amount of wishing or bargaining or raging will change it. When you accept this truth, you free up enormous amounts of energy that can be redirected toward things you actually can influence: your present moment choices, your attitudes, your responses to circumstances, your path forward. Acceptance doesn't mean you can't take action. In fact, acceptance is often the foundation for wise action. When you're still in denial or resistance, you can't see clearly what needs to be done. You're too busy fighting reality to respond to it skillfully. But when you accept what is, you can assess your situation accurately and make choices based on what's actually true rather than on what you wish were true. For example, if you lose your job and spend weeks in denial, telling yourself it will all work out, that someone will realize they made a mistake and rehire you, you're not taking productive action. But if you accept that you've lost your job and that dwelling in denial won't help, you can start updating your resume, reaching out to contacts, looking for new opportunities, perhaps even exploring career changes you've been considering for a while. The same principle applies to loss and grief. If you're stuck in denial about a death, spending all your energy wishing the person was still alive, you can't begin the healing process. But when you accept that they're gone, you can start to think about how you want to honor their memory, how you want to move forward, what kind of life you want to create that integrates this loss rather than being destroyed by it. Acceptance is also deeply connected to the Buddhist practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness means paying attention to the present moment with an attitude of curiosity and non-judgment. It means observing your experience, your thoughts, emotions, sensations, circumstances without immediately trying to change them, fix them, or make them different. When you're grieving, mindfulness allows you to be present with your grief rather than running from it. You notice the physical sensations in your body, the tightness in your chest, the heaviness in your limbs, the ache in your throat. You notice your thoughts, the memories that arise, the questions that circle endlessly, the stories you tell yourself about your loss. You notice your emotions, the waves of sadness, the flashes of anger, the moments of numbness. And you allow all of this to be there without judgment. You don't tell yourself you shouldn't feel this way. You don't criticize yourself for not being stronger or more resilient. You don't compare your grief to anyone else's. You simply observe what is arising in your experience with as much compassion and gentleness as you can muster. This mindful awareness creates a kind of space around your grief. The grief is still there, but you're not completely consumed by it. You're the one who is aware of the grief, not identical with it. This subtle shift makes an enormous difference. When you're completely identified with your grief, when you are nothing but your sadness and pain, it feels overwhelming and endless. But when you can observe your grief with some degree of awareness, you remember that you are larger than this emotion, that grief is an experience you're having rather than the totality of who you are. The Buddha taught meditation as a primary tool for developing this kind of awareness and acceptance. In meditation, you practice being present with whatever arises, pleasant sensations, unpleasant sensations, neutral sensations, thoughts, emotions, sounds, silence without trying to hold on to what you like or push away what you don't like. You practice equanimity, which is a balanced state of mind that can hold all experiences with equal steadiness. This doesn't mean you enjoy painful experiences or that you become indifferent to suffering. It means you develop the capacity to be with difficulty without being overwhelmed by it. You learn that you can feel sadness without being destroyed by it. You discover that emotions, no matter how intense, are impermanent. They arise, reach a peak, and gradually subside. Many people who have experienced significant loss find meditation to be incredibly helpful, though it can also be challenging, especially in the early stages of grief. When you sit quietly with yourself, all the feelings you might normally avoid or distract yourself from come rushing to the surface. This can be uncomfortable, even painful, but it's also healing. By allowing yourself to feel your grief fully, by not running from it or numbing it or trying to think your way out of it, you gradually integrate the loss into your being in a healthy way. There's a concept in Buddhism called the second arrow. The Buddha taught that when something painful happens, it's like being struck by an arrow. The first arrow is the actual painful event, the loss, the injury, the disappointment. This first arrow causes pain, and that pain is unavoidable. It's part of being alive. But then we often shoot ourselves with a second arrow. This second arrow is our reaction to the pain, our resistance, our judgment, our stories about what the pain means. We say, "This shouldn't have happened. I can't handle this. My life is ruined. I'll never be happy again. Other people have it so much easier than I. What did I do to deserve this?" These thoughts and reactions are the second arrow, and they cause additional suffering on top of the pain of the first arrow. Sometimes, the suffering from the second arrow is actually worse than the pain of the first arrow. The event itself may be brief, a moment of loss, an instant of injury, but the suffering we create around it can last for years. Acceptance is about learning to stop shooting ourselves with the second arrow. When loss occurs, we feel pain, that's the first arrow, and it's natural and appropriate. But we don't have to add layers of suffering through resistance, judgment, and mental anguish. We can acknowledge the pain, feel it, allow it to be there, and refrain from all the additional stories and reactions that make it worse. This is easier said than done, of course. We have deeply ingrained habits of resistance and reactivity. When something painful happens, our immediate response is often to push it away, to protest against it, to tell ourselves it shouldn't be happening. These reactions are automatic, arising from years of conditioning. But through practice, through meditation, through mindfulness, through repeatedly coming back to acceptance, we can gradually change these patterns. We can learn to catch ourselves when we're shooting the second arrow and choose to put down the bow. We can learn to respond to pain with compassion rather than resistance. Let us return to the story of Kisa Gotami and explore another layer of the Buddha's teaching. When Kisa Gotami came back to the Buddha after her night of searching for mustard seeds, she had learned about the universality of death. But the Buddha's teachings went deeper than this single realization. Over the years that followed, as Kisa Gotami studied and practiced, she came to understand the more profound aspects of the Dharma. One of these teachings concerns the nature of self. The Buddha taught anatta, which is often translated as non-self or no self. This is one of the most subtle and profound aspects of Buddhist philosophy, and it has deep implications for how we understand and work with loss. The doctrine of non-self teaches that what we think of as our fixed, permanent, independent self is actually an illusion. There is no unchanging essence, no permanent soul, no me that exists independently of all other things. Rather, what we call self is actually a constantly changing collection of physical and mental processes that arise and pass away moment by moment. Your body is not a fixed thing. It's a process of continuous change, cells dying and being born, food being transformed into tissue, energy being consumed and replenished. Your mind is not a fixed thing either. It's a stream of thoughts, emotions, perceptions, and intentions, each arising and passing away, none of them permanent. Even your personality, your habits, your preferences, all the things you might think of as essentially you, are not fixed. They're shaped by your genetics, your upbringing, your experiences, your current circumstances. They change over time. The person you were as a child is not the same as the person you are now, and you will continue to change throughout your life. So if there is no fixed, permanent self, Then what dies when someone dies? What exactly is it that we lose? This question takes us to the heart of Buddhist teachings on death and impermanence. From the Buddhist perspective, death is not the extinguishing of some permanent soul or essence. It's simply the cessation of a particular combination of physical and mental processes. During life, these processes, the body, the sensations, the perceptions, the mental formations, the consciousness, are continuously arising and passing away, but there's an overall continuity that we call being alive. At death, this continuity ends. The processes that were happening cease. But nothing eternal is destroyed, because nothing eternal existed in the first place. This teaching can be both disturbing and liberating. It's disturbing because we naturally cling to the idea of a permanent self, both our own and that of our loved ones. We want there to be something enduring, something that persists beyond death. We want to believe that the essential person we loved still exists somewhere, unchanged. But the teaching is also liberating because much of our suffering around death comes from our attachment to permanence. We suffer because we believe that something permanent has been lost. We suffer because we feel that an injustice has occurred, that someone who should have continued to exist has been taken away. When we understand that nothing was ever permanent to begin with, that all things are in constant flux, our relationship to loss can shift. This doesn't mean we stop caring about people or that their deaths don't matter. It means we understand more clearly what we're actually grieving. We're not grieving the loss of an eternal soul that has been destroyed. We're grieving the end of a particular manifestation of life, the cessation of a unique combination of qualities and experiences that will never exist in exactly that form again. And we're grieving our own loss, the end of our relationship with that person, the hole in our lives where they used to be, the future experiences we won't have together. This is real grief, legitimate and deep. Understanding non-self doesn't make this grief disappear, but it can help us hold the grief more lightly, with less existential terror and more acceptance of the natural order of things. Kisa Gotami's story illustrates this teaching beautifully. At first, she was completely identified with her role as mother. Her son was not just someone she loved. He was the center of her identity, her purpose, her worth in the eyes of others. When he died, it felt like she herself was dying. Without him, who was she? What was her value? How could she possibly continue to exist? But through the Buddha's teachings, she came to understand that this identification was a source of suffering. She was not only her role as mother, she was not defined entirely by her relationship to her son. These were aspects of her experience, but they were not permanent, fixed essences. They were temporary conditions that had arisen and, in the case of her son's life, passed away. This realization allowed Kisa Gotami to grieve her son while also recognizing that she continued to exist, that she had value and purpose beyond her role as his mother, that her life could have meaning even after his death. She didn't stop loving her son. She didn't forget him or pretend his death didn't matter, but she found a way to integrate his death into her understanding of reality, rather than being destroyed by it. The Buddha also taught about the concept of dukkha, which is often translated as suffering, but might be better understood as unsatisfactoriness, or stress, or that which is difficult to bear. Dukkha is one of the three marks of time, existence, along with impermanence and non-self. Dukkha doesn't mean that everything is terrible, or that life is nothing but misery. It means that there is an inherent unsatisfactoriness to conditioned existence. Things don't quite work the way we want them to. Pleasure doesn't last as long as we'd like. Pain lasts longer than we can stand. We get what we don't want and don't get what we do want. Even when we achieve what we think will make us happy, the satisfaction is temporary and incomplete. Loss is perhaps the most obvious manifestation of dukkha. We love someone, and that love brings us joy and meaning, but it also makes us vulnerable to the suffering of loss. We build a life, develop relationships, create a sense of security and stability. But all of these things are subject to change and eventual dissolution. Nothing we create or acquire or achieve will last forever. The Buddha taught that the root cause of dukkha is tanha, which is usually translated as craving or thirst. We crave pleasure and try to hold on to it. We crave for unpleasant experiences to go away. We crave for things to be different than they are. This craving, this constant reaching for something other than what is, creates suffering. When loss occurs, we experience a particular kind of craving, the craving for what was. We want the person who died to be alive again. We want our old life back. We want things to be the way they were before the loss occurred. This craving is completely natural and understandable. But it's also a source of suffering because it puts us in opposition to reality. We're wanting something that cannot be, and this creates an internal struggle that adds to our pain. The path out of suffering, according to the Buddha, is not to get everything we want or to avoid all loss and difficulty. That's impossible. The path out of suffering is to let go of craving, to accept things as they are, to stop fighting against reality. This letting go is not the same as not caring. You can care deeply about someone while also accepting that they are impermanent, that you will eventually lose them. In fact, truly accepting impermanence can make you appreciate people more, not less. When you understand that your time with someone is limited, you're more likely to be present with them, to express your love, to resolve conflicts, to make the most of the time you have together. And when loss does occur, acceptance allows you to grieve fully, without adding layers of resistance and protest to your natural sadness. You can feel the pain of missing someone without the additional suffering of "this shouldn't have happened," or "I can't survive this," or "my life is over." The Buddha taught that there is a path leading to the cessation of suffering. This path is known as the Noble Eightfold Path, and it consists of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. In the context of working with loss and grief, several aspects of this path are particularly relevant. Right view involves seeing things as they actually are, understanding impermanence, non-self, and the nature of suffering. When you have right view, you don't take loss personally or see it as an aberration. You understand it as part of the natural order of things. Right intention involves cultivating wholesome motivations and attitudes. In relation to grief, this might mean setting the intention to heal, to honor your loved one's memory in meaningful ways, to eventually find peace while still cherishing what you had together. It means orienting yourself toward growth and understanding, rather than getting stuck in bitterness or despair. Right mindfulness is the practice of present moment awareness we discussed earlier. It means being with your grief as it is, observing it without judgment, neither suppressing it nor being completely overwhelmed by it. Right concentration refers to the development of mental focus and stability through meditation. When your mind is concentrated, it's not as easily swept away by emotions. You can experience feelings without being consumed by them. This stability is invaluable when dealing with the turbulence of grief. Together, these aspects of the path provide a framework for working skillfully with loss. They don't make the pain go away instantly, but they provide tools and perspectives that make the pain more bearable and ultimately transformative. Let us consider some of the other stories and teachings from Buddhist tradition that relate to loss and acceptance. There is the story of the Buddha's own encounters with death and impermanence, which first set him on his spiritual path. The Buddha, before his enlightenment, was a prince named Siddhartha Gautama. He grew up in luxury, sheltered by his father from any contact with suffering. His father wanted him to become a great king, not a spiritual seeker. So he created an artificial world of pleasure and comfort, keeping Siddhartha confined to the palace grounds, where he would never see anything unpleasant. But as a young man, Siddhartha grew curious about the world beyond the palace walls. On 4 separate occasions, he ventured out into the city, and on each occasion, he encountered something that shook his sheltered worldview to its core. On the first trip, he saw an old person, bent and frail with age. Siddhartha, who had never seen aging before, asked his chariot driver what was wrong with this person. The driver explained that this was the natural process of aging, that all people who live long enough become old and weak. On the second trip, Siddhartha saw a sick person suffering from disease. Again, he asked what this meant, and again, his driver explained that this was the reality of illness, that all bodies are subject to sickness and pain. On the third trip, Siddhartha encountered a funeral procession. He saw the grief of the mourners and the reality of death. His driver explained that all living beings eventually die, that death is the inevitable end of every life. These 3 encounters with old age, sickness, and death are known as the 3 heavenly messengers because they awakened Siddhartha to the reality of suffering. He realized that the comfortable life he had been living was a kind of illusion, that beneath all the pleasure and beauty, there was this undeniable reality of impermanence and loss. On his 4th trip outside the palace, Siddhartha saw a wandering ascetic, a spiritual seeker who had renounced worldly life in search of liberation from suffering. This encounter showed him that there might be a path beyond suffering, a way to find peace even in the face of old age, sickness, and death. These 4 sights motivated Siddhartha to leave his comfortable life, his wife, his newborn son, his position as prince, to seek the truth about existence and the path to liberation. He spent years practicing extreme asceticism, nearly killing himself in his quest for enlightenment. Eventually, he realized that neither extreme indulgence nor extreme self-denial led to liberation. He adopted what he called the middle way, a balanced approach to spiritual practice. Finally, sitting under a tree in deep meditation, Siddhartha achieved enlightenment. He became the Buddha, the awakened one, fully understanding the nature of reality and the path to freedom from suffering. What's significant about this story in relation to our topic is that the Buddha's entire spiritual journey was sparked by his confrontation with impermanence and loss. He saw that death was inevitable, that everything and everyone he loved would eventually be lost, and he couldn't rest until he understood how to be at peace with this truth. The Buddha's enlightenment didn't make him immune to loss. Later in his life, he experienced the deaths of his closest disciples, including Sariputta and Moggallana, 2 of his most beloved students. He grieved these losses, but he grieved without the added suffering of resistance and attachment. He understood that their deaths were part of the natural order, that the forms they had taken were impermanent, and that his love for them didn't require them to live forever. There's another profound teaching story about a monk named Maha Kassapa, who was one of the Buddha's foremost disciples. When the Buddha died, Maha Kassapa was traveling and didn't learn of his teacher's death until several days later. When he finally heard the news, he was overcome with grief. But among the monks who were with Maha Kassapa when he learned of the Buddha's death, there was a range of reactions. Some, including Maha Kassapa himself, wept openly, throwing themselves on the ground in their sorrow. But one monk, an elderly man who had recently been ordained, did not weep. Instead, he said, "Enough, brothers. Do not grieve. Do not lament. Haven't we been told that all things that are dear and pleasant to us are subject to change, separation, and becoming otherwise? How could it be that what is born, come into being, compounded, and subject to dissolution, should not dissolve?" This monk's words reflect a deep understanding of impermanence. He wasn't being callous or uncaring. He was simply recognizing reality that the Buddha's physical form, like all forms, was subject to dissolution. His lack of visible grief didn't mean he didn't care. It meant he had accepted impermanence so completely that even the death of his teacher, though surely painful, didn't shake his equanimity. Maha Kassapa's response is also instructive. He didn't hide his grief or pretend he wasn't affected. He allowed himself to feel the full weight of his loss. But eventually, he composed himself and took on the responsibility of leading the monastic community after the Buddha's death. His grief was real and valid, but it didn't incapacitate him or prevent him from continuing the work the Buddha had begun. These stories illustrate an important point. Acceptance of loss doesn't mean you don't feel grief. The Buddha never taught that enlightened beings don't experience emotions. What changes with spiritual development is not whether you feel grief, but how you relate to it. You can feel sadness without being destroyed by it. You can miss someone deeply while also accepting that they're gone. You can honor your emotions while not being completely identified with them or overwhelmed by them. In Buddhist countries, there are many rituals and practices designed to help people work skillfully with death and grief. These practices provide structure and support during the difficult period after a loss, and they also reinforce the teachings about impermanence and acceptance. For example, in many Buddhist traditions, there are specific periods of mourning with associated practices. Family members might maintain an altar with a photo of the deceased, make daily offerings, recite specific prayers or sutras. These rituals serve multiple purposes. They honor the deceased, provide a focus for grief, create a sense of connection to the person who has died, and gradually help the mourners integrate the loss into their lives. Meditation on death is also a common practice in Buddhism. Monks and nuns regularly contemplate the inevitability of death, sometimes even meditating in charnel grounds among the dead. This might sound morbid to Western sensibilities, but the purpose is not to become obsessed with death or to develop a pessimistic worldview. Rather, it's to deeply internalize the truth of impermanence, so that when loss occurs, and it inevitably will, you're not shocked or completely unprepared. Regular contemplation of death can actually make life more precious. When you truly understand that your time is limited, that you could die at any moment, you're less likely to waste your days on petty concerns. You're more likely to tell the people you love that you love them, to pursue what's meaningful to you, to resolve conflicts rather than letting them fester, to appreciate the simple fact of being alive. There's a traditional Buddhist practice called the 5 remembrances, which the Buddha himself encouraged his students to recite regularly. These 5 reflections are: I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. These remembrances might seem depressing at first glance. Why would you want to regularly remind yourself of aging, illness, death, and separation? But the purpose of these contemplations is not to make you miserable. It's to help you live more fully and wisely. When you regularly acknowledge that you will age, you take better care of your body and appreciate your current health. When you acknowledge that you will die, you consider how you want to spend your limited time. When you acknowledge that you will be separated from everyone you love, you cherish your relationships more deeply and express your love more freely. The fifth remembrance, that your actions are your only true belongings, is particularly significant. Everything else can be taken from you. Your health, your possessions, your relationships, your status, your very life. All of these are temporary and subject to loss. But your actions, the choices you make, the way you live your life, the impact you have on others, these belong to you in a deeper sense. They shape who you are and create your legacy. This teaching encourages people to focus on what's truly within their control. You can't control whether you'll experience loss. You will. You can't control when people will die. Everyone dies eventually. But you can control how you respond to loss, how you treat people while they're alive, what kind of person you choose to be in the face of difficulty. Kisa Gotami internalized these teachings deeply. After her initial awakening to the universality of death, she spent years in dedicated practice, meditating on impermanence, cultivating equanimity, developing wisdom. She became known for her ascetic practices, her renunciation of worldly comforts, her single-minded focus on liberation. In one of her poems, preserved in the Therigatha, she describes seeing a light in the darkness and understanding it as a metaphor for enlightenment, the end of ignorance and the beginning of true understanding. She speaks of how all her delusions have been destroyed, how she has achieved what she set out to achieve, how she is now free. This freedom wasn't about escaping from life or becoming cold and detached. It was about understanding life so deeply that she was no longer buffeted about by circumstances, no longer destroyed by loss, no longer at the mercy of her cravings and aversions. She had found the peace that comes from complete acceptance of reality as it is. But Kisa Gotami's story also teaches us that this kind of acceptance and peace doesn't happen instantly. It's not as if she went to the Buddha, learned about impermanence, and immediately achieved enlightenment. The story shows us the beginning of her journey, the moment when her eyes were opened to a larger truth. But the actual work of transformation took years of dedicated practice. This is an important point for anyone dealing with loss. You might understand intellectually that death is natural, that impermanence is the nature of reality, that everyone experiences loss. But understanding something intellectually is different from truly accepting it at the deepest levels of your being. That deeper acceptance comes gradually, through repeated encounters with the truth, through practice, through the slow erosion of old habits and the cultivation of new ones. Grief has its own timeline, and it's not linear. You might feel like you're making progress, achieving acceptance, finding peace, and then suddenly be hit by a wave of grief that feels as intense as it did in the beginning. This doesn't mean you've failed or that you're not making progress. It just means that grief comes in cycles, that healing isn't a straight line from pain to peace. The Buddhist approach honors this reality. It doesn't promise instant freedom from grief, or suggest that you should be over it by a certain time. It acknowledges that the work of transforming suffering into wisdom is ongoing, that you'll need to return again and again to the practices of mindfulness, acceptance, and compassion. There's also an important teaching in Buddhism about the difference between grief and depression. Grief is a natural response to loss. It involves sadness, longing, sometimes anger or guilt, but it's connected to the specific reality of what has been lost. Over time, even though grief may return in waves, there are also moments of peace, moments when you can remember your loved one with more joy than pain, moments when you feel connected to life again. Depression, on the other hand, is a more pervasive state, where everything seems dark and hopeless. It's not necessarily connected to a specific loss, and it doesn't lift even temporarily. From a Buddhist perspective, depression often involves a very strong identification with negative thoughts and emotions, a sense of being completely trapped in suffering with no way out. If you're experiencing what might be depression after a loss, the Buddhist practices can still be helpful, but they should be combined with other forms of support: therapy, medication if needed, connection with others, basic self-care. The Buddha was practical in his approach to suffering. He wouldn't suggest that meditation alone is sufficient for every form of difficulty. Sometimes we need multiple forms of support to heal. The teaching of skillful means in Buddhism recognizes that different people need different approaches, depending on their circumstances, personality, and needs. What helps one person work through grief might not help another. Some people benefit from solitary meditation and contemplation. Others need community support and ritual. Some find healing through creative expression. Others need to take action in the world, perhaps by volunteering or advocating for causes related to their loss. The key is to find what works for you, while still returning to the fundamental truths: impermanence, the universality of loss, the possibility of acceptance, the path from suffering to peace. Let us also consider how Buddhist teachings on acceptance of loss relate to different types of loss. Because not all losses are the same, we've been focusing primarily on death, which is the most final and irrevocable form of loss. But people experience many other kinds of loss throughout their lives, and the teachings on acceptance can apply to all of them. There's the loss of relationships through divorce or breakup. There's the loss of health through illness or injury. There's the loss of abilities through aging or accidents. There's the loss of employment, financial security, homes, communities. There's the loss of identity that can come with major life transitions, retiring from a career, children leaving home, losing a role that defined you. There's even the loss of possibilities and dreams, the path not taken, the goals not achieved, the life you imagined that didn't materialize. This kind of loss can be particularly difficult because it's less tangible and might not be recognized or validated by others. All of these losses, large and small, involve impermanence and change. All of them can be opportunities to practice acceptance. And all of them tend to trigger similar responses: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and eventually, if we're fortunate, acceptance. This framework, popularized by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her work on grief, actually aligns well with Buddhist understanding of how we typically respond to unwanted change. The Buddhist approach would add that these stages aren't necessarily linear or separate. You might cycle through them multiple times. You might experience several of them simultaneously, and the goal isn't to rush through them to get to acceptance as quickly as possible. The goal is to be present with wherever you actually are in the process, to meet each stage with mindfulness and compassion rather than judgment. For example, if you're in the anger stage, Buddhist practice doesn't mean suppressing your anger or pretending you're not angry. It means acknowledging the anger, feeling it in your body, understanding what it's telling you, but not acting destructively from that anger or building elaborate stories that keep the anger alive. You can be angry about your loss while also understanding that the anger, like everything else, is impermanent and will eventually subside. Or if you're in the denial stage, mindfulness means recognizing that you're in denial. It means noticing the ways you're resisting reality, the stories you're telling yourself, the bargains you're making. You don't have to immediately jump to acceptance. You can simply be aware that this is what you're doing right now, and that awareness itself begins to create the conditions for acceptance to emerge. Buddhist teachings can be particularly helpful for what psychologists call complicated grief, grief that persists for an unusually long time or is particularly intense and debilitating. Complicated grief often involves a kind of attachment to the grief itself, a fear that letting go of the grief means letting go of the person who died or the thing that was lost. The Buddhist understanding of attachment can help with this. You can love someone deeply, honor their memory, keep them in your heart forever without holding on to grief as the way to maintain that connection. In fact, perpetual grief is often more about you than about the person who died. It's your suffering, not theirs. Letting go of the most painful aspects of grief doesn't mean forgetting. It means healing, so that you can remember with more peace and love and less agony. There's also the Buddhist concept of mudita, which is often translated as sympathetic joy or appreciative joy. It means the ability to feel joy at others' good fortune, to celebrate their happiness even when you're struggling yourself. This can be particularly challenging when you're grieving. You see other people with their intact families, their healthy children, their smooth life transitions, and it can trigger envy or resentment. But practicing mudita, genuinely wishing others well, feeling glad for their happiness rather than bitter about your loss, can actually help with your own healing. When you're stuck in comparing your situation to others, when you're asking, "Why me?" or feeling that life is unfair, you're adding suffering to pain. When you can genuinely be happy for others, even while you're sad for yourself, you're breaking down the walls of isolation and bitterness that keep you trapped in suffering. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to feel happy when you're actually sad. It means noticing when bitterness or envy arise and gently redirecting your mind toward more wholesome states. It means recognizing that another person's happiness doesn't diminish your worth or invalidate your loss. Buddhism also teaches about the interconnection of all things, sometimes called dependent origination or interdependence. This teaching says that nothing exists independently. Everything arises in dependence on countless other factors and exists in relationship to everything else. This teaching has profound implications for how we understand loss. When someone dies, for example, they don't simply vanish without a trace. They continue to exist in the impact they had on others, in the memories held by those who knew them, in the consequences of their actions, in the ways they shaped the world and the people around them. You carry within you the influence of everyone who has ever touched your life. Your parents and ancestors live on in your genes, your learned behaviors, your values, your stories. Your teachers live on in the knowledge they shared with you. Your friends live on in the experiences you shared and the ways they shaped who you are. Even people you've lost continue to influence you through the memories you hold, the lessons they taught you, the love they gave you. Understanding this interconnection can help with the pain of loss. The person may be gone in physical form, but they're not entirely gone. They persist in countless ways, woven into the fabric of reality, part of the ongoing flow of cause and effect. This doesn't replace their physical presence, doesn't eliminate the pain of missing them, but it can provide some comfort and a sense of ongoing connection. There's a beautiful practice in some Buddhist traditions of dedicating merit to those who have died. Merit, in Buddhism, refers to the positive energy or spiritual benefit that comes from wholesome actions, generosity, ethical behavior, meditation, acts of kindness. The practice of dedicating merit involves doing something positive and then mentally offering the benefit of that action to someone else, often someone who has died. For example, you might meditate and then dedicate the peace and clarity you gained to your deceased loved one, or you might make a donation to charity in their memory and dedicate the merit of that generous action to them. The belief is that this somehow benefits the deceased in their next life or their journey after death. Whether or not you believe in rebirth or the literal transfer of merit, this practice can be helpful for the living. It provides a way to maintain connection with the deceased, to honor their memory through positive action, to transform your grief into something constructive. It shifts you from passive suffering to active commemoration. Instead of just being sad about your loss, you're doing something meaningful because of your loss. This points to a broader principle in working with grief: the importance of finding meaning in loss. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, wrote about the human need for meaning and the ability to find meaning, even in the most horrific suffering. While his perspective came from existential philosophy rather than Buddhism, there's a deep alignment between his ideas and Buddhist teachings on transforming suffering. The Buddha taught that suffering can be a teacher, a catalyst for awakening, a doorway to deeper understanding. This doesn't mean that suffering is good or that we should seek it out. It means that when suffering inevitably comes, we have a choice about how to relate to it. We can let it embitter us and close our hearts, or we can let it soften us and open us to wisdom and compassion. Many people who have experienced profound loss report that it changed them in fundamental ways. Some of these changes are painful: a loss of innocence, a shattering of the illusion that we're in control of our lives, a heightened awareness of how fragile everything is. But many people also report positive changes: deeper compassion for others who suffer, greater appreciation for what they have, clearer priorities, less concern with trivial matters, more authentic relationships. These positive transformations don't make the loss worthwhile. No one would choose to lose a loved one in order to become more compassionate or appreciative. But given that loss has occurred, finding some meaning or growth in the experience can be part of the healing process. Kisa Gotami's story exemplifies this transformation. She went from being a mother whose entire identity was wrapped up in her son to becoming a spiritual seeker and eventually an enlightened teacher. Her loss, devastating as it was, became the catalyst for her spiritual awakening. She transformed her personal suffering into universal wisdom, her individual grief into compassion for all beings who suffer. Again, this doesn't mean her son's death was good or necessary, or that she should be grateful it happened. It means she found a way to create meaning from tragedy, to ensure that something of value emerged from something so painful. This is something you can do with your own losses. You can ask yourself, what can I learn from this experience? How has it changed me? What matters to me now that I understand impermanence more deeply? How can I honor my loved one's memory through the way I live my life going forward? How can my experience of loss make me more compassionate toward others who are suffering? These questions don't have easy answers, and they're not questions you should force yourself to answer before you're ready. Early in grief, it's enough just to survive, just to get through each day. But eventually, when you have the energy and inclination, reflecting on these questions can be part of moving from raw grief toward acceptance and integration. The Buddhist concept of the bodhisattva is relevant here. A bodhisattva, in Mahayana Buddhist tradition, is someone who vows to achieve enlightenment not just for themselves, but for the benefit of all beings. Bodhisattvas are motivated by compassion. They see the suffering of the world and dedicate themselves to relieving it. There's a teaching that bodhisattvas actually use their own suffering as a means of understanding and connecting with the suffering of others. They don't avoid or deny their pain. Instead, they let it open their hearts to the pain of all beings. They think, if I am suffering this much from this one loss, how much must others be suffering from their losses? May my experience help me understand them and serve them better. This bodhisattva approach to suffering transforms it from something purely personal and isolating into something that connects you to all of humanity. Your grief becomes a bridge to understanding others' grief. Your loss makes you more sensitive to others' losses. Your struggle to accept what has happened helps you be patient with others who are struggling with their own unacceptable realities. You don't have to be a Buddhist or believe in the bodhisattva ideal to adopt this approach. You can simply decide that your suffering will not be wasted, that you will use it to become a more compassionate, understanding, helpful person. You can choose to let your losses soften your heart rather than harden it. Many people who have experienced significant loss find that it changes their priorities and values in profound ways. Things that seemed important before: status, material possessions, winning arguments, being right, impressing others, suddenly seem trivial. What matters becomes clearer. Relationships, kindness, presence, authenticity, making a positive difference in the world. The Buddha taught about right livelihood as part of the Eightfold Path. Right livelihood means engaging in work that doesn't cause harm and ideally contributes to the welfare of others. For some people, experiencing loss prompts a re-evaluation of their livelihood. They realize life is too short to spend it in work that feels meaningless or harmful. They make changes, sometimes radical ones, to align their daily activities with their deeper values. Others find that loss changes how they approach their existing work. They bring more compassion to their interactions with colleagues. They advocate for policies that support people who are struggling. They recognize the humanity in everyone they encounter, knowing that everyone is carrying burdens and facing challenges that aren't always visible. Loss can also transform how you experience everyday moments. When you've truly internalized the teaching of impermanence, when you've felt the reality of loss in your bones, you tend to be more present. You don't take things for granted as much. You notice beauty more keenly. You savor experiences more fully. You tell people you love them more often. There's a Zen saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activities are the same, but the way you experience them is completely different. You do them with more awareness, more appreciation, more presence. The same is true after significant loss. You still do all the ordinary things: wake up, eat breakfast, go to work, have conversations, do chores. But if you've allowed the loss to teach you about impermanence, you do these things differently. You're more aware that this ordinary moment is precious because it won't last forever. This ordinary conversation might be the last one you have with this person. This ordinary day is one of a limited number of days you'll have in this life. This awareness doesn't have to be morbid or anxiety-producing. It can actually make life richer, more vivid, more meaningful. Instead of sleepwalking through your days, assuming you'll always have time later for what really matters, you wake up and engage fully with what's here right now. Buddhism also teaches about equanimity, which is one of the 4 divine abodes, or boundless states, along with loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy. Equanimity is often misunderstood as indifference or detachment, but it's actually a state of balanced awareness and acceptance. Equanimity means remaining stable and centered regardless of circumstances. It means not being thrown off balance by either pleasure or pain, praise or blame, gain or loss. It's the quality of mind that allows you to be with whatever is arising without being overwhelmed by it or desperately clinging to it. Developing equanimity doesn't mean you don't feel emotions. It means the emotions don't completely take you over. You can feel sadness without drowning in it. You can feel joy without becoming inflated by it. You can experience loss without being destroyed by it. The traditional Buddhist analogy for equanimity is the earth. The earth receives everything equally: rain and sunshine, seeds and waste, praise and insult, beautiful offerings and trash. The earth doesn't discriminate or prefer one thing over another. It simply receives everything with the same stable, grounded presence. Cultivating this kind of equanimity in the face of loss is advanced practice. It's not something you can force or fake. It develops gradually through repeated experiences of observing your reactions, feeling your emotions fully, and recognizing their impermanent nature. When you're in the midst of fresh grief, equanimity might seem impossible or even undesirable. You don't want to be stable and balanced. You want your loved one back. You want reality to be different. And that's okay. That's where you are. Buddhist practice always starts with accepting where you actually are, not where you think you should be. But over time, with practice, you may find that you can hold your grief with more spaciousness. The grief is still there, but you're not completely identified with it. You're the space in which the grief arises, not just the grief itself. This spaciousness is equanimity, and it provides enormous relief, even in the midst of continued sadness. There's an important distinction in Buddhism between equanimity and suppression. Suppression means pushing down your feelings, pretending they're not there, maintaining a false sense of being okay. This is not healthy and not what Buddhism teaches. Suppressed emotions don't disappear, they go underground and cause problems in other ways. Equanimity, by contrast, involves fully acknowledging and feeling your emotions while maintaining awareness that you are more than your emotions. You feel the grief, but you also remain aware of the part of you that is observing the grief. You experience the pain, but you don't collapse into it completely. This is where meditation practice becomes incredibly valuable. In meditation, you learn to observe your thoughts and emotions without immediately acting on them or being swept away by them. You watch a thought arise, notice it, and watch it pass away. You feel an emotion, observe it in your body, and notice how it changes moment by moment. This doesn't make the emotions less real or less valid. It just gives you more choice about how to respond to them. Instead of being on autopilot, immediately reacting to every thought and feeling, you create a small gap between stimulus and response. In that gap lies freedom. Viktor Frankl wrote about this space between stimulus and response. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. This is perfectly aligned with Buddhist teachings on mindfulness and equanimity. When you're grieving, this space might be very small at first. A wave of sadness hits, and immediately you're crying. Or rage surges, and immediately you're shouting. Or longing overwhelms you, and immediately you're lost in memories. That's natural and okay. But gradually, with practice, the space might grow slightly larger. You feel the wave coming, and you have a moment to breathe, to ground yourself, to choose how to be with what you're feeling. This doesn't mean controlling your emotions or deciding not to cry or not to feel. It means having more awareness and choice. Maybe you choose to go ahead and cry, but you do so consciously rather than being ambushed by tears. Maybe you choose to sit with the feeling for a moment before expressing it. Maybe you choose to journal about it or talk to a friend or go for a walk. The point is that you're responding from awareness rather than purely reacting from emotion. And this makes an enormous difference in your overall well-being and your ability to move through grief toward acceptance. Let us also consider the Buddhist teaching on the near enemies of positive qualities. A near enemy is something that looks like a virtue but is actually a subtle form of the opposite. Understanding near enemies can help you avoid pitfalls in your grief work. For example, the near enemy of equanimity is indifference. Equanimity is balanced, open awareness. Indifference is closed, shut down, not caring. They might look similar on the surface, both involve not being overly emotional, but they're actually very different. Equanimity comes from deep acceptance and understanding. Indifference comes from suppression and disconnection. If you find yourself not feeling much of anything after a loss, unable to cry or feel sad, you might think you've achieved equanimity. But more likely, you've shut down emotionally, which is indifference or dissociation. True equanimity would involve feeling your feelings fully while maintaining perspective and balance. The near enemy of compassion is pity. Compassion involves recognizing suffering and having a genuine desire to relieve it, while still respecting the dignity and agency of the person who is suffering. Pity, by contrast, looks down on the person, sees them as less than, feels superior even while feeling sorry for them. When people pity you for your loss, it often feels diminishing and uncomfortable. When people have compassion for you, it feels supportive and validating. The difference is subtle but significant. Similarly, the near enemy of acceptance is resignation. Acceptance is an active, conscious acknowledgement of reality. Resignation is passive, giving up, a sense of defeat and hopelessness. Acceptance opens up possibilities for how to move forward. Resignation closes down possibilities and leads to despair. If you find yourself thinking, "Nothing matters anymore," or "I'll never be happy again," or "There's no point in trying," you've likely crossed from acceptance into resignation. Acceptance would sound more like, "This happened, and I can't change it, but I can choose how to live with it," or "I'm deeply sad, and I will probably always miss this person, but I can still find moments of peace and meaning." Being aware of these near enemies helps you stay on track in your grief work and spiritual practice. When you notice yourself slipping into indifference, resignation, or pity toward yourself or others, you can gently redirect yourself back toward true equanimity, acceptance, and compassion. The Buddha also taught about the importance of sangha, which means community. In Buddhist context, Sangha traditionally refers to the community of monks and nuns, but more broadly, it means any community of practitioners who support each other on the spiritual path. When you're dealing with loss, community becomes incredibly important. Grief can be isolating. You might feel like no one understands what you're going through. You might withdraw from social contact because it feels too hard to explain how you're feeling or to put on a brave face. But isolation usually makes grief worse. Humans are social beings. We heal in connection with others. We need people who can witness our pain, sit with us in our sadness, help us with practical tasks when we're overwhelmed, remind us that we're not alone. The right kind of community doesn't try to fix you or rush you through your grief. They don't tell you to look on the bright side or remind you that others have it worse. They simply show up. They sit with you. They listen. They hold space for whatever you're experiencing without judgment or advice unless you ask for it. In traditional Buddhist communities, there are formal structures for this kind of support. When someone experiences a loss, the community comes together for rituals and ceremonies. They help with practical arrangements. They provide food and company. They chant together and meditate together. The bereaved person is held by the community, not left to struggle alone. In modern Western society, we often lack these traditional structures, which can make grief harder. You might get a few days of casseroles and condolences, but then everyone expects you to return to normal quickly. The support disappears just when you might need it most. If you're grieving, it's important to actively seek out support rather than waiting for it to come to you. This might mean joining a grief support group, seeing a therapist, reaching out to friends and family, connecting with a faith community, or finding online communities of people who have experienced similar losses. It's also important to be specific about what you need. People often want to help, but don't know what to do. Instead of waiting for them to guess, you can tell them, "I need someone to sit with me. I need help with grocery shopping. I need to talk about my loved one. I need distraction. I need you to check in on me regularly." The Buddhist concept of metta, or loving kindness, extends not just to others, but to yourself. Self-compassion is crucial when you're grieving. Many people are much harder on themselves than they would ever be on someone else in the same situation. You might judge yourself for not being strong enough, for crying too much or not crying enough, for not handling things better, for having complicated feelings like relief or anger mixed with sadness. You might feel guilty if you have moments of happiness, as if enjoying something means you're betraying your loved one or not grieving properly. Self-compassion means treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would offer a good friend. It means recognizing that you're doing the best you can in a difficult situation. It means accepting that there's no right way to grieve, no timeline you should follow, no standard you need to meet. Kristin Neff, a researcher who studies self-compassion, identifies three elements: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Self-kindness means being warm and understanding toward yourself rather than self-critical. Common humanity means recognizing that suffering is part of the shared human experience rather than something that isolates you. Mindfulness means being present with your feelings without over-identifying with them or suppressing them. These three elements align beautifully with Buddhist teachings. Self-kindness is metta directed toward yourself. Common humanity is recognition of the universality of suffering, which Kisa Gotami learned in her journey through the city. Mindfulness is the foundational practice of Buddhist meditation. Practicing self-compassion when you're grieving might involve talking to yourself gently, as you would to a child who is hurting. It might involve giving yourself permission to rest, to cry, to not be productive, to do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. It might involve acknowledging how hard this is and how well you're doing just to get through each day. There's a loving kindness meditation practice in Buddhism where you direct wishes for well-being toward different people, starting with yourself. You might say, silently, "May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I be happy. May I live with ease." Then you extend the same wishes to someone you love, someone you feel neutral toward, someone you have difficulty with, and eventually to all beings everywhere. When you're grieving, the self-directed portion of this practice becomes especially important. You might modify it to be more specific to your situation. May I find peace. May I be kind to myself. May I accept what I cannot change. May I heal at my own pace. Simply offering yourself these wishes, whether or not you believe them or feel them in the moment, plants seeds of self-compassion that gradually take root. The Buddha's teachings on the middle way are also relevant to working with grief. The middle way means avoiding extremes, finding balance between opposing tendencies. In the context of grief, the middle way means not suppressing your emotions, but also not wallowing in them endlessly. It means not denying your loss, but also not making grief your entire identity. It means honoring your loved one's memory without getting stuck in the past. It means feeling your pain without adding unnecessary suffering through resistance and attachment. Some people, when they lose someone, try to immediately get over it and move on. They suppress their grief, stay busy, distract themselves, refuse to talk about the loss. This is one extreme, and it usually backfires. The grief doesn't disappear, it just goes underground and emerges in other ways, often as physical illness, depression, anxiety, or relationship problems. Other people get stuck in their grief, unable or unwilling to move forward. They keep the deceased person's room exactly as it was. They talk about the loss constantly. They define themselves primarily as a bereaved person. They resist anything that might bring joy or normalcy back into their lives because it feels like a betrayal. This is the other extreme, and it prevents healing and growth. The middle way involves feeling your grief fully when it arises, but also being open to moments of peace, joy, and connection. It involves remembering your loved one and keeping them in your heart, but also continuing to engage with life and create new experiences. It involves honoring what was lost, while also accepting what is and being open to what might be. This balance is delicate and personal. It looks different for everyone. What might be healthy grieving for one person might be avoidance for another, or excessive attachment for someone else. You have to find your own middle way through trial and error, self-reflection, and honest assessment of how your choices are affecting your well-being. Buddhism also teaches about the concept of skillful and unskillful actions. Skillful actions are those that lead to less suffering and more well-being, both for yourself and others. Unskillful actions lead to more suffering. When you're grieving, it's especially important to be mindful of which actions are skillful and which are unskillful. Some common unskillful responses to grief include isolating yourself completely from others, cutting off all support and connection, numbing your pain with alcohol, drugs, excessive work, or other addictive behaviors, lashing out at people who care about you because you're in pain and they're safe targets, making major life decisions impulsively while you're in acute grief and not thinking clearly, refusing all self-care and letting yourself deteriorate physically and mentally. Comparing your grief to others or judging yourself for how you're handling things, these unskillful actions are understandable. Grief is overwhelming, and we all cope in whatever ways we can. But they ultimately create more suffering on top of the suffering you're already experiencing. Skillful actions in grief might include reaching out for support, even when it feels hard, allowing yourself to feel your emotions without judgment or suppression, maintaining basic self-care, eating, sleeping, moving your body even when you don't feel like it, being gentle with yourself about what you can and can't handle right now, connecting with others who have experienced similar losses, finding small ways to honor your loved one's memory that feel meaningful to you, engaging in practices like meditation, prayer, journaling, or time in nature that help you process your emotions, being patient with yourself and trusting that healing takes time. Again, there's no perfect way to grieve. You'll probably engage in some unskillful actions along the way, and that's okay. The point is to cultivate awareness of what helps and what doesn't, and gently guide yourself toward what serves your healing. The Buddha taught that everything we do with body, speech, and mind leaves an imprint, creates karma. Karma literally means action, and the teaching is that our actions have consequences that shape our future experiences. In the context of grief, this means that how you work with your loss now will influence how you experience life going forward. If you let loss close your heart, embitter you, make you afraid to love again, those consequences will unfold in your future. If you let loss open your heart, deepen your compassion, clarify your values, those consequences will unfold differently. You're not in complete control of these outcomes. There are many factors that influence how grief affects you, including your support system, your previous experiences, your temperament, the circumstances of the loss. But you do have some agency in how you respond, and that agency matters. The choices you make moment by moment to be kind to yourself or harsh, to reach out or isolate, to practice acceptance or fight reality, to find meaning or sink into despair. These choices accumulate and shape your path forward, not in a punishing or judgmental way, but simply as a natural consequence of cause and effect. This teaching can be empowering. It means you're not helpless or passive in the face of grief. You can't control that loss occurred, but you can influence how you move through it and who you become on the other side of it. As we come toward the end of our exploration of Buddhist teachings on acceptance of loss, let us return once more to Kisa Gotami and reflect on what her story ultimately teaches us. Kisa Gotami's journey from desperate denial to profound acceptance didn't happen because the Buddha told her intellectual truths about impermanence. It happened because he compassionately guided her to discover those truths for herself through direct experience. He sent her out into the city not to torture her or prove a point, but because he knew that only by seeing the universality of death with her own eyes, hearing story after story of loss from people in every household, could she truly understand that she wasn't alone, that death is woven into the fabric of existence, that her suffering, while deeply personal, was also part of something much larger. And when she returned to him, having performed the funeral rites for her son, having begun to accept what she had been denying, he didn't lecture her or say, "I told you so." He simply asked what she had learned and then invited her to learn more. He met her exactly where she was and offered her a path forward. This is the essence of the Buddhist approach to loss, meeting people where they are with compassion, offering truths that can be discovered through experience rather than just accepted on faith, and pointing toward a path that leads from suffering to peace. Kisa Gautami's transformation from grief-stricken mother to enlightened teacher shows us that even the most devastating loss can become a doorway to awakening. Not that we would choose such a doorway, not that the loss was necessary or good, but simply that once loss has occurred, we have a choice about what to do with it. We can let it destroy us, or we can let it transform us. We can close our hearts, or we can let them break open. We can resist reality, or we can accept it and discover what lies on the other side of acceptance. The Buddha's teachings on loss offer no false comfort, no empty platitudes, no promises that everything happens for a reason, or that your loved one is in a better place, or that time heals all wounds. Instead, they offer something more honest and ultimately more helpful, a clear-eyed recognition of the truth of impermanence, a compassionate understanding of the universality of suffering, and a practical path for working with loss in a way that leads to healing, wisdom, and peace. These teachings tell us that loss is inevitable, but prolonged suffering is optional, that grief is natural, but we don't have to add layers of resistance and attachment that make it unbearable. That acceptance doesn't mean not caring, but rather caring deeply while also understanding the impermanent nature of all things. They teach us that we're not alone in our losses, that every person who has ever lived has faced the pain of losing what they love, that there's a great community of fellow sufferers, and that recognizing this can ease the terrible isolation of grief. They teach us that impermanence, while it makes loss inevitable, also makes life precious. That understanding everything changes can help us appreciate what we have while we have it, live more fully in the present moment, and hold our relationships with both love and lightness. They teach us that accepting what we cannot change frees up enormous energy to focus on what we can influence: our attitudes, our responses, our choices about how to move forward. They teach us that grief can be a teacher, that suffering can crack us open to wisdom and compassion, that loss can clarify what matters and help us live more authentically and purposefully. And perhaps most importantly, they teach us that acceptance is possible, that peace is possible, even in the face of the most heartbreaking losses, not because we forget or stop caring, but because we understand more deeply the nature of reality and our place within it. Kisa Gautami found that peace. After years of dedicated practice, she achieved the liberation that the Buddha taught, freedom from the suffering caused by attachment, resistance, and ignorance. Her grief didn't disappear, but her relationship to it transformed completely. She could remember her son with love rather than anguish. She could help others who were suffering because she had walked that path herself and found a way through. You too can find this peace, not by trying to skip over your grief or deny your loss, but by moving through it with awareness, acceptance, and compassion. The path is not easy or quick. There will be days when the pain feels overwhelming, when acceptance seems impossible, when you wonder if you'll ever feel whole again. But if you keep returning to the practices mindfulness, acceptance, self-compassion, connection with others, finding meaning in your loss gradually, almost imperceptibly, things will shift. The waves of grief will become less frequent and less intense. The moments of peace will become more common and longer lasting. You'll find yourself able to hold both the sadness of your loss and the possibility of joy in your current life. You'll discover that you can honor what was lost while also embracing what remains. You can carry your loved one in your heart while also moving forward into new experiences. You can acknowledge that something precious has ended while also remaining open to what might begin. And ultimately, you may find as Kisa Gotami did, that your loss has taught you something essential about being human, about love and impermanence, about suffering and acceptance, about the profound courage it takes to keep your heart open in a world where loss is inevitable. The mustard seed story has been teaching this lesson for over 2,500 years, passed down through generations of Buddhist practitioners, retold in countless countries and cultures. It endures because it speaks to something universal and timeless, the human struggle with loss and the possibility of acceptance. When Kisa Gotami went searching for a household untouched by death, she was searching for something else too, an exception to the rule, a way to avoid the truth of impermanence, proof that her suffering was unique and therefore unbearable. What she found instead was that her suffering, while deeply personal, was also universal. And in that universality, she found not more despair, but the seeds of liberation. She learned that you cannot gather mustard seeds from a house where no one has died, because death touches every household, every family, every heart. She learned that searching for an escape from this truth only prolongs suffering. And she learned that accepting this truth, while painful, is also the beginning of peace. This is the lesson the Buddha offered her, and through her story offers us, that the path to peace doesn't lie in escaping from loss, but in understanding it deeply and accepting it fully. That resistance multiplies suffering, while acceptance, though it requires great courage, ultimately brings relief, that we are all in this together, all facing the same fundamental challenges of impermanence and loss, and that recognizing our shared condition can ease our sense of isolation and despair. As you face your own losses, whether they are losses of people, of health, of dreams, of the life you thought you would have, may you remember Kisa Gotami's journey. May you remember that your grief is valid and your pain is real, but that you are not alone in it. May you find the courage to accept what cannot be changed, while remaining open to growth, healing, and transformation. May you hold your losses with gentle, open hands, neither denying them nor clinging to them. May you honor what was while accepting what is. May you find meaning in your suffering and let it soften rather than harden your heart. May you discover, as Kisa Gotami did, that even in the midst of profound loss, there is a path forward, that acceptance is possible, that peace is waiting on the other side of resistance. That life, with all its impermanence and uncertainty, with all its inevitable losses and endings, is still precious and worth living fully. And may you find, in the depths of your own heart, the wisdom and compassion that the Buddha taught, the understanding that everything changes, that all things pass away, and that this truth, rather than being a cause for despair, can be the foundation for a more authentic, present, and loving way of being in the world. The Buddha once said that he taught only two things: suffering and the end of suffering. Everything else was commentary. Kisa Gotami learned this truth through the unbearable suffering of losing her child. She learned that suffering arises from attachment and resistance, and that the end of suffering comes through acceptance and understanding. You need not lose as much as she lost to learn this lesson. Every loss, large or small, is an opportunity to practice what the Buddha taught. Every moment of disappointment, every experience of things not going the way you wanted, every encounter with impermanence is a chance to choose acceptance over resistance, to choose presence over denial, to choose growth over bitterness. This doesn't make loss easy or pleasant. It doesn't eliminate pain, but it provides a framework for working with difficulty in a way that leads to less suffering and more peace. It offers a path through the darkness, tested by millions of practitioners over thousands of years, validated by the direct experience of people like Kisa Gotami, who walked it before us. As we close this exploration of Buddhist teachings on acceptance of loss, take a moment to reflect on your own experiences. What have you lost in your life? What are you resisting, accepting? Where are you shooting yourself with the second arrow, adding suffering to pain through your resistance and stories? What would it feel like to accept what is, fully and completely, even if just for this moment? You don't have to answer these questions out loud or even consciously. Just let them settle into your awareness. Let them work on you gradually, the way the Buddha's teaching worked on Kisa Gotami, not through force or demand, but through gentle, patient invitation to see more clearly. And remember that acceptance is not a destination you arrive at once and for all. It's a practice you return to again and again, moment by moment, breath by breath. Some days will be easier than others. Some days you'll feel at peace with your losses, and other days the grief will be fresh and overwhelming. Both experiences are normal and acceptable. The path forward is not about never feeling pain or always being perfectly accepting. It's about gradually developing the capacity to be with whatever arises, to meet your experience with kindness and awareness, to return to acceptance when you've drifted into resistance, to trust that even in the midst of loss and change, there is a stability and peace that cannot be taken from you. May you find that stability. May you know that peace, and may you walk your path with the same courage and dedication that Kisa Gotami brought to hers, transforming your suffering into wisdom, your losses into lessons, your grief into compassion for all beings who grieve. For in the end, this is what the Buddha taught, and what Kisa Gotami discovered, that we are all searching for the mustard seeds that will cure our pain, all hoping to find the one house where death has never entered, all wishing that we might be the exception to the rule of impermanence. But there are no such seeds. There is no such house. There are no exceptions. There is only this life, these precious moments, these relationships that will not last forever. This one wild and beautiful existence with all its joy and sorrow, connection and loss, love and grief. And there is the choice, moment by moment, to accept it as it is, to hold it all with open hands, to love deeply without clinging desperately, to grieve fully without being destroyed, to let loss crack us open rather than close us down, to find peace not by escaping from reality but by embracing it completely. This is the path. This is the teaching. This is what the Buddha offered Kisa Gotami, and what she, through her story, offers us. May we have the wisdom to accept it, may we have the courage to walk it, and may we find, at the end of our own searching, the same peace and liberation that she discovered when she finally came home to the truth of impermanence, accepted her loss, and opened her heart to all beings who suffer. For we are all Kisa Gotami, carrying our dead children through the streets, searching desperately for the cure that will undo what has been done, hoping against hope for the impossible. And we are all invited, as she was, to stop searching for what cannot be found, and instead to see what is right in front of us, the universality of loss, the impermanence of all things, and the possibility of peace that comes not from escaping these truths, but from embracing them fully. May you find your way home to acceptance. May you know the peace that passes understanding, and may your losses, when they come, be teachers that guide you toward wisdom, compassion, and the profound freedom that comes from finally, fully letting go.